Well, Tashi Delay, welcome to the AWAM Tibetan Buddhist Institute and our Dharma talk today about the heart essence of Tibetan Buddhism. First, we'll give a little bit of general background and then some basics about the path of individual liberation and the Bodhisattva principles, core practices. We've been going through those. And so today we are in chapter 10 of the book, Innate Happiness. And this is on the third training of the Path of Altruism, the wisdom chapter. So we typically have three parts as we go through these. First of all, we talk a little bit about the background in terms of ethics, and then we continue on with forms of meditation, and then finally we look at the wisdom or the insight aspect of the tradition. So today, we are concluding the second of the different paths that we've been looking at. So this is the path of the Bodhisattva or the path of altruism. So it is helpful here to differentiate between wisdom and altruism, insight, as terms frequently are used interchangeably as equals, and they're very close to each other, but there are some nuances. And so the wisdom is more common in Mahayana and Tantra forms of Buddhism, but the words in English do have differences. So wisdom typically means a cognitive understanding, so a mental understanding, the approach used primarily in various Buddhist philosophical schools that evolved over time, whereas insight, on the other hand, refers to an intuitive understanding, which is based on our actual experiences of things, more commonly used by yogis and the Buddha himself. At the time, philosophical views also evolved towards the word transcendent. And this view is generally articulated as being non-conceptual, while most explaining it conceptually. So we say it's transcendent, it's non-conceptual, and yet we use all kinds of words to try and explain it. So wisdom on the path of altruism is firmly grounded in the teachings of the Buddha, who some of his closest disciples, the sutras are the teachings of either of those two. And then nevertheless, are some evolution in the conceptual explanations and texts used to explain this wisdom. So even the most remote ones relies on some kind of explanation. And there are three forms of this literature that have been collected into the path of altruism per se. The first one is Buddhanature. The second, Transcendent Wisdom. And the third is called the Middle Way. This is a different middle way than what we've been talking about in terms of practice. So we'll examine each of these in a summary fashion, as the literature is quite extensive, and even these notes are a bit complicated, so we'll have to take a very careful look at them. So for the householder, that level of depth is not only unnecessary, but it can be an obstacle to your understanding and practice. Nevertheless, in the in-depth investigation into these ideas embedded in these teachings can facilitate greater insight for those willing to be able to take time and make the effort. But that is not our level of focus. And so we're not going to go into that really deep view of all of these things, but rather a summary of the principles involved in basic differences between these three main versions. So the first one, Buddhanature, or Uttara Tantra. So in the first turning of the wheel, so we have typically in this text three turnings of the wheel. And so this is the first turning of the wheel. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. In the second turning of the wheel, he is said to have taught emptiness, that is, empty of any inherent existence and dependent arising or interdependence of all things. So in the third turning of the wheel, he taught the Buddhanature, or luminous emptiness, as it is sometimes expressed. The text referenced here is dated to the time of Asanga, which is somewhere between 50 CE and 200 CE. So that's a big gap, 150 years. We don't know exactly what time he lived, and so just to give us a context. However, it is based on statements in earlier sources going back to the Pali Canon of the path of individual liberation. So it's not just something that kind of happens in and of itself or is an addition to the way things are in the past, although it does have those elements, but it is a part of that view of things, and then some elaboration and clarification and so forth of it. So, another note that I just wanted to add a little bit here. Recent evidence indicates that the earliest texts are just claims and that they match up with the historical evidence from much later times. Nevertheless, these are core principles of Buddhism today, and we can view them literally or figuratively. Okay? So we have those options and understanding, and that's largely true in terms of Buddhism generally these days anyway. We can believe everything very literally, or we can believe them in terms of their symbolic meaning and so forth. So we go into the Buddhanature. All sentient beings are endowed with this luminous emptiness, as it is expressed based on this and Transcendent Wisdom literature presented momentarily. Two interpretations emerged from this. The first is that all beings have the seed for becoming a Buddha. It's like a plant. You have a seed, you plant the seed in the dirt, a little bit of water, some sunshine, and it grows up into a plant. So they're saying in that context that this is like a seed. We all have this seed. And then through doing these practices, gaining our thorough understanding of it, it's like the flower has grown up and matured. So the second one then is that all beings are already a Buddha, but have not realized that they are. Okay? So it's innate within us, if you will. In both cases, they exist in samsara being this life and the problems involved with that, due to their own afflictive emotions and mental obscurations. Now, we have lots of lists about the kind of problems that we experience in our lives, and those two terms are kind of a summary of those. So afflictive emotions, the feelings and so forth that happen, and the mental obscurations, the cognitive aspect of that. So those are known as the two obscurations, if you will. So what is luminous emptiness, discussed here in this part? In the Path of Individual Liberation, we saw that the Buddha defined emptiness as the lack of inherent self-existence. That is, we have no true or real self. So nothing exists except in dependence upon other causes and conditions. So it's not completely independent of anything. Maybe independent of some things, but not independent of everything. It's interconnected, interdependent, if you will. So there is nothing that exists permanently on its own. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily say nothing is permanent, but it actually works out that way as we dig through some of the characteristics here. Furthermore, we did meditations to develop direct insight into this in the true nature of things back in previous part of our study here. In the Uttara Tantra, the Buddha in the form of Maitreya. Maitreya is the Buddha of the future, or so characterized. He seems to be present in a lot of ways otherwise. So the Buddha of the future expands upon this view by adding the adjective luminous to it. So it is often described as clarity. So it's illuminated in terms of its clarity. In other words, is this clear? Thus, it is clarity of understanding. The difference then can be understood as a direct understanding as opposed to an intellectual understanding, the emptiness of emptiness, if you will. So this is not to say that those on the path of individual liberation only understood emptiness conceptually, but it does appear to have been a serious enough issue to warrant additional clarification. No pun intended. While the innate nature of luminous emptiness is the most critical contribution of the Uttara Tantra, it also elaborates on views of the Buddha, Dharma, the Sangha, liberation, qualities of Buddhahood, and the Buddha activities. Although those go beyond what we're going to talk about here today, but they are all included in many of these texts, which are exhaustive. There's huge amounts of texts, and it takes Buddhist scholars many, many years to even read them, let alone try to really gain a deep understanding of them. But there are core elements here that practically anyone can get to understand. And so we're hoping that that's what we're going to do here. Number 2 then is Transcendent Wisdom, or Prajna Paramita. This is a transcendent wisdom, literally the perfect or perfection of wisdom. This literature may be the second major contribution of the understanding of the wisdom of the path of altruism, although dating covers the range of several centuries, so it's kind of hard to tell exactly when these 3 topics that we're talking about here today, what order they're in, and how they influenced or may have influenced each other. So here we're looking at it as being the second one after Buddhanature, but that's not something that's absolutely certain. This is a body of literature dating from as early as 100 BCE. The best known is the Heart Sutra, which we will see here momentarily, which is known in either a short version of 14 verses or lines and 25 verses or lines. So we have those 2 versions. The best known is this Heart Sutra, and in Sanskrit, it was a translation, it is said, from Chinese. This originated in China, not in India. And so it is often included in daily recitations of monasteries. There is also a set of 8 other main texts, the best known being the Diamond Sutra. So there are a bunch of texts. Some of them are actually quite long. And this is said, some sources, to have been a form of the text, an abbreviation of the text that came from other sources of this collection of texts. So the Heart Sutra contains the famous line, I'm sure that you have heard if you've spent any time in Buddhism at all: form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness is not other than form. So it continues through an extensive list of characteristics of what emptiness is not. So the whole idea here, and the term that's being used as a part of this, is that it is beyond explanation. It is beyond terminology or any words that we can use. And so what it's doing is explaining what it is not, rather than trying to explain what it is. So it continues through this extensive list of characteristics of what emptiness is not, including many core principles of Buddhist teaching. Using this via negativa approach, which is a Western term of how to approach this, but it's a very common element in Indian language. It attempts to give a concise sense of emptiness without saying what it is. The basic idea is that the wisdom of emptiness transcends anything that can be said about it. Our wisdom comes from the direct understanding. I have inserted a few brief notes from the text to facilitate a basic understanding of this. So I'm going to read this short version of this text here. Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. So Avalokiteshvara is Chinrezi, or the Bodhisattva about compassion. That's his primary focus. The Dalai Lama is said to be an incarnation of that, or a realization of that. So realizing perfect wisdom clearly saw that the five aggregates are emptiness, thus transcending suffering, and that is liberation, transcend all suffering. So the five aggregates, if you're not real familiar with that term, those are form, or referring to our body, the feelings, perceptions that we have, thoughts that we have, as well as consciousness. So those are the five. So this is dealing primarily with those five. O Shariputra. Now Shariputra is one of the Buddha's original principal disciples. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. The same is true with feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness. So there he goes through those five elements. So this illustrates our lack of any inherent or innate self-existence, independent of each other. So that philosophically is the key principle that is being made here. We are not independent of other things. And you dig in, deeper you dig, the more you find out it's connected to more and more things. So then he continues, O Shariputra, all phenomena are emptiness, or empty of these relationships. They are not produced nor destroyed, not defiled nor pure, not deficient nor complete. So they have transcended traditional views of existence. Therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feelings, no perceptions, no mental formations, and no consciousness. So those are our six senses, with consciousness being the sixth of those. There is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No seeing, no hearing, no smelling, no tasting, no touching, no thinking. So our various forms of perceptions are also a part of this. There's no seeing involved, no hearing involved, and so forth. Even the organs themselves, no eye, and so forth. So though it transcends those, is what it's trying to say. There is no realm of sight and so on, up to no realm of consciousness. So a realm dealing with that, which is more of a cognitive kind of an understanding of them. Thus, we are deluded regarding our perceptions. And that is very important here as a part of this. And even from science, we've learned more and more and more in the last few decades about the brain and how that works, the sense organs, how they're connected, and how they deal with things, to the point that it is way different from a scientific view than what our ordinary perceptions are. So in this way, science is actually very parallel to what is trying to be described in ways that they knew nothing about at the time. They knew nothing about science. Nobody knew anything about the brain until within the last couple hundred years or so. And so they had no idea of that. Continuing on then, there is no ignorance and no extinction of ignorance. And so ignorance is thought as a root cause of all sufferings and delusions. But here it is saying those don't even exist, okay? Not as literal kinds of things, at least. So then we continue on here. There is no old age and death. Didn't the Buddha say there is old age and death? And no extinction of old age and death either. So here the Buddha is said to have referred to old age and sickness and death and being liberated into deathlessness, for a term that's sometimes not real common, but it's sometimes used as a way to describe or express what the Buddha was saying. So it's an indescribable transcendent state of parinirvana, complete cessation of samsara, which samsara is sufferings, all of the kinds and forms of sufferings that we may experience in our lives. And then the text goes on, likewise, there is no suffering, no origination of suffering, no extinction of suffering, no path. There is no wisdom and no attainment. What? Well, that's what this is all about in terms of practice, right? Is to overcome those things. And here they're saying they don't even exist. Well, there's different ways of understanding what we mean by something that exists or does not exist. Continuing, since there is nothing to be attained, the Bodhisattvas rely on this perfection of wisdom and abide in it without fear. Liberating themselves from illusion, they awaken ultimate liberation. So they're abiding in this transcendent wisdom, one of complete calm, deep peace, and complete contentment in this life. Being bodhisattvas, we also engage in altruistic, unconditional loving kindness and great compassion for all beings. So, excuse me, we are looking at this in a very different way. This whole idea of transcendent wisdom is very different, very new to Buddhism as a part of that. At one point, the Buddha himself talked about, he didn't use the term emptiness very often. Once in a while, when he talked about something like that, he was talking about something being empty. So it's empty of X or Y or Z, different things that it's empty of. As a part of that, it's not emptiness itself. The word emptiness in English is often defined as something that is beyond any kind of explanation. It is totally beyond any kind of thing at all. So continuing here, the text says, all Buddhas in the past, present, and future attained ultimate liberation by relying on this perfect transcendent wisdom. So the idea here is they did it, and so can we. All right? Therefore, one should know that perfect transcendent wisdom is the greatest mantra, the highest mantra, the incomparable mantra, the mantra that clears all suffering, the deepest truth. A very strong assertion here. The mantra for perfect transcendent wisdom is proclaimed. So the mantra kind of says it all, if you will. It said, gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisoha. So the meaning of that is go or gone. So go beyond, go totally beyond, and then we might insert resulting in, that's not part of it, but that's the inference here, resulting in ultimate enlightenment. Soha at the end. So soha is just kind of an expression of yay, hooray, so forth. So there's another translation here that I like because it's actually more concise and more clearly expressed than the one that we just went through here. This is a translation referred to as Dzogchen Prajnaparamita or Heart Sutra. So the focus here is realization of transcendent understanding of things beyond ordinary sense experiences based on the Dzogchen view. Now we'll talk about Dzogchen later after we go through all of the stuff in Tantra, which is quite lengthy. So Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of great compassion, going deep into the profound practice of transcendence, saw clearly that the heart essence of the five aggregates is empty of conceptualizations, and thus are completely empty of concepts like permanence, independence, and self-existence. Those three words, those are three key core words that the Buddha used in describing the nature of things. So repeat that. So permanence, things are not permanent, and that was the Buddhist view there. And then independent, nothing is independent. And self-existence, nothing exists just on its own self. Okay? So we could easily flip those around, and that usually would be more meaningful for us. So we would say everything is impermanent, everything is interdependent, everything has no independent existence, the self-existence. So it's not self-existent, but it's combined and related and interdependent with other things. Therefore, the heart essence of Rigpa, which means pure awareness, transcends all conceptualizations. The heart essence of the form aggregate is pure awareness, and pure awareness is the heart essence of form. So this is a little bit different expression of what we had from the other translation. So then the heart essence is of form is not other than pure awareness. Pure awareness is not other than the heart essence of form. So here the heart essence is being used as something that replaces the idea of emptiness per se. And I think that's good because we can relate pretty easily, especially when we get to Dzogchen and understanding what that means and how it functions and so forth. It makes a lot more sense than to try and say it's emptiness. Really? How can it actually be if it's emptiness? So that is a little bit of a problem for people to try to understand and experience. So then it continues on. Thus, all phenomena are fundamentally conditioned with pure awareness. They are not produced nor destroyed, not defiled nor pure, not deficient nor complete. Those are all ideas about something, and they transcend that level. The Rigpa level in Dzogchen is just totally beyond conceptualizations. So there is no other heart essence in form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Now we're going through the lists from the other one. There is no heart essence in my eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind. There is no other heart essence in seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. There is no other heart essence in the realm of sight, and so on, up to the realm of consciousness. There is no other heart essence in ignorance or extinction of ignorance. There is no other heart essence in old age and death or extinction of old age and death. There is no other heart essence in suffering, origination of suffering, extinction of suffering, the path. There is no other heart essence in wisdom or attainment. All are transcended in the heart essence of mind. So in our practices, what we do is we attain this state that transcends our conceptualizations that we normally are engaged in daily life, if you will. And then it continues with the summary here. Since there is nothing other to be attained, the Bodhisattvas abide in this transcendent heart essence without fear. Liberating themselves from delusions, they awaken ultimate enlightenment or liberation. And then, therefore, one should know that perfect transcendence is the greatest mantra, the highest mantra, the incomparable mantra. The mantra that clears all suffering, the deepest truth. The mantra of perfect transcendence is the same one, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisoha. So then we dissolve the visualization and just rest in pure awareness, beyond all of the conceptualization that's involved in ordinary life and understanding that. So from these texts, we can now see how the Path of Altruism took philosophical position that transcended even the core philosophical tenets of the path of individual liberation taught by the Buddha and actually a number of levels of followers. We know since then that a lot of what is, for example, in the Pali Canon was written in times much later than the Buddha, but it doesn't mean that we gave up all of the things that he had articulated. But here specifically, it says there are no aggregates, no ignorance, no suffering, not even nirvana. So we usually talk about all of these negative things that are obstructions and cause our suffering from that. And then the goal within the Buddhist tradition then is to attain this state that is beyond that, called nirvana. So how can you even call yourself a Buddhist? Well, the answer came from the middle way, grounded directly in the teachings of the Buddha himself. So that's our third characteristic for today, the middle way, or Madhyamaka. One of the results of this was a third major contribution to the wisdom literature, and arguably the most significant, the middle way. Nagarjuna is the source of this. Some refer to him as the second Buddha. He's another one that we don't know for sure exactly when he lived. Somewhere it's estimated between 150 and 250 CE. It's considered to be the founder of the Madhyamaka approach. Say he is the founder of the Path of Altruism altogether. He is sometimes referred to as the second Buddha. He states that emptiness and dependent arising have the same importance. So this idea of dependent arising is a key here in terms of our understanding of these terms. Excuse me. And so they are really considered to be two ways of talking about the same view, the nature of reality. The central tenet of this approach is that emptiness is not a thing, it is not no thing, it is not both, and it is not neither. So it's sometimes called his tetralemma. And so we have these four parts of that. And let me repeat it again. It's not no thing, or not a thing to start, not no thing, not both, and not neither. Transcendent. And that way of explaining that term. Thus, emptiness is beyond any concept or logical explanation. He summed up his reasoning in the Mula Madhyamaka Karikas. His disciple, Buddhapalita, wrote a famous commentary on this as well. The Madhyamaka approach is divided into two groups, the Rangtong and Shentong. And then the Rangtong is further subdivided into two groups, the Svatantrika and Prasangika. So that leaves three levels, and before we had the list of the five altogether, and so you can look back at that list and see that. So the purpose of the Svatantrika approach is to establish the emptiness of any self-nature. There is no self as a fixed entity of all phenomena. All are interdependent and thus have no self-nature. The Madhyamakas do not consider the mind stream of the Chittamatrans, the path of individual liberation that we looked at previously, to be ultimate emptiness at all. And so they said, no, that's not it. You're just labeling it with other things. You're not making any progress here. And so the Svatantrikas find no self nature in either the objects of consciousness or consciousness themselves. Okay? It's just not there. The Madhyamakas all agree that appearances are only relative truth and have no ultimate reality. So a lot of times in Buddhism, we talk about a difference between the relative and the ultimate. In general, I would say that the relative is our everyday experiences, the kind of things that we view or experience in our everyday lives, whereas the ultimate is an expression that is beyond that. And in this case, it's talking about it in terms of something that transcends all of that. So it's a transcendent expression beyond words and concepts and so forth. So these appearances are only relative truth and have no ultimate reality. All Madhyamaka systems clarify awareness by exhausting the reasoning mind. We're not going to exhaust the reasoning mind. We're going to try to get at it in a little more simple and straightforward manner than trying to do it in that way. Just to add a little bit from what is in the book, modern science agrees with a lot of the appearances that are not real. Okay, at least they're not in the way that we think they are. We can't see the atoms. In fact, there's actually no color anywhere. Imagine that. But the color is actually created in our brain, they know now. All right? And so when we dig into science and the way that things are said to be, now we can't actually confirm that everything that science says is correct is actually correct, but they certainly have a deeper understanding of it than we do. But we live at the relative realm. Do we really have to know that there are atoms around and so forth? Do we have to know that there are no real colors, that those are being created in our brain? No, not for everyday experience. It's not that critical. But in Buddhism, it is an important consideration of understanding. And so the approach here that is being used in this part of the book for the Bodhisattva path is the Svatantrika approach that I mentioned. And so the Svatantrika approach uses reason to establish that consciousness and their objects cannot be ultimately real, because each arises only in dependence on the other, and neither has a self-nature of its own. So everything is interdependent here. The Svatantrika approach is used to use arguments to refute the self-nature of phenomena and then to establish that their true nature is emptiness, a lack of a complete independence. Personally, I would rather say it's interdependent rather than has independent as a characteristic. Why don't we just say what it is instead of what it's not? But the language of India, particularly at that time, tended to look at things from that negative point of view, called via negativa, as a language characteristic. So we're a little bit stuck with it because translators continue to translate it in that way. Continuing on, however, relative truth is the way things appear to the non-critical ordinary consciousness. So relative truth, the way that we see things, ordinary consciousness. And the absolute truth is the ultimate nature of a thing that is established through accurate and minute analysis by means of the rational mind, the way things really are. So we find those two terms as definitions quite often, but there are also other definitions that are sometimes used as a part of that. But this difference between the way things appear versus the way things really are. The way things really are in Buddhism doesn't always match up with science, however, so there's that issue. I think the Dalai Lama has been very supportive of science. And I think that in some of his talks, he's been clear that we need to consider, the views of science and how that works. And usually it's a good match with the articulation of what we're trying to say in Buddhism. So we have those two. And then in the dream example here, each of these different theoretical views, philosophical views, also has been documented as a form of a dream, if you will. So in the dream example, appearances happen but have no real self-nature. They do appear. So we have a dream, it appears, but you can't touch it in your hand, you can't grab it, and so forth. Even though their absolute reality is emptiness. So we're talking about appearances of things. So at their absolute level, it's just emptiness. It's beyond those characteristics that we've been talking about, the independence. It's not independent, and so forth. So labeling those things, making sure that we understand those characteristics. Thus, all phenomena are said to be emptiness. They do not accept the Chittamatra view that we looked at previously, that there is some existing substance called mind. So mind is a process that's going on in the brain. The brain is the substance that exists. The mind is the result of that. Mind is relative, not absolute. The ultimate nature of all phenomena is emptiness because they are merely concepts. Even concepts such as emptiness itself can be established as being empty. Emptiness of emptiness. And emptiness of emptiness of emptiness. I asked one of my lamas one time about that. And I said, are there two emptinesses here? And he says, well, there's actually, I can't remember the exact number, but I think he said 21 different forms of emptiness. Okay, we're not going to talk about those today. Thus, Tsongkhapa argues that everything that exists only conventionally. Even the two truths, ultimate and relative, that we've talked about, are both considered to be conventional in this view. Thus, emptiness itself lacks any intrinsic nature. So emptiness of emptiness, empty of its own emptiness. In Madhyamaka, emptiness is the absence of any other level of intrinsic nature. In Madhyamaka, emptiness is, I crossed over lines here. In Madhyamaka, emptiness is the absence of any other level or type of existence. It is only called ultimate truth because it is realized by the mind that analyzes how things ultimately exist. Okay? The danger here, though, is reifying emptiness as something that is truly existent in and of itself. The concept of emptiness rather than emptiness itself. So ultimately, the true nature of things cannot be conceptualized as existent, non-existent, both, or neither. So we go back to that tetralemma that we talked about. The method is to examine all elements of existence in turn until you reach the conviction, confidence in this, that all without exception are in fact empty. In terms of those specific characteristics, okay? I think we need to add that back in. And that's, again, the reason why I think it would be better off to deal with emptiness, because that's so general, so generic. And here we could just, and it's only 3 words, and often even just 2. Put those in there, it would make things a whole lot more clear, my point of view. No one approach to the analysis is to break a phenomenon into parts. Is it existent in a single entity or one made up of parts? And we've talked about this a little bit before. This is known as one or many system of analysis. If it can be divided into parts, each of those is further examined, to see if it is one or many, and so forth. So you keep digging deeper and deeper into whatever it is. If it cannot be established as either a single or self-entity, nor can it be any one of its many parts, then it can be said to have no self-nature. It's pretty easy. This doesn't take a whole lot of work to try and figure this out, especially with those of us who have some background in science, because in science, this is just all over the place. It's simply a concept, the same argument that can be applied to mental phenomena. So basically what it's talking about here is taking a physical object and looking at it and say, okay, is it just a thing in and of itself? Or does it have some parts involved? Well, you can see the core part down there, and actually these, if you're not familiar with them, the handle part of it is screwed into it. So it's got those parts. So there's at least 3 parts in this. And then you can begin digging deeper into the meaning of there's different parts here in the handle, and here's some faces in the handle, and here's some other parts look like flowers or something else. And so there's all of these parts that are included in there. Some things are more basic, more simple. Other things are more complicated. And so the idea here is that the real nature of things is just a concept. We're labeling them with words and expressing them as concepts. Now we have to be careful about the concepts that we're applying to them. Is it real or is it not real? So the same argument can be applied to mental phenomena as well. The second approach used is that of dependent arising or interdependence. If an object has self-nature, it is said to exist independently of any other phenomena, causes, or conditions. So if we go back to the bell, because we can use the same thing for both of these types of analysis, and we look at that, well, how did that get to be a bell? It's made out of metal. Where did the metal come from? How did somebody process that metal? I mean, there's many, many questions that you could talk about. How did it get transported from one place to another? How did it get sold from one place to another? Was it online, or was it somewhere in a store, and so forth? So there are so many things that you could get into in terms of some kind of a self-nature. So it is said to exist independently of any other phenomena, causes, or conditions. Anything that arises in dependence upon any other cause or condition has no self-nature. Each object is analyzed for one or more causes and conditions until you exhaust your mind. That can go pretty fast if you have a simple mind like I do. Of all possible analyses, and you become convinced of the certainty that all phenomena have no self-nature. It would probably be better to say independent self-nature. So this is done each of the 6 senses. So seeing, in terms of seeing, is it just a simple thing? Well, it takes light from the outside, it takes an eye to process that, and then that goes in through various kinds of connections into different parts of the brain, which then analyzes it in different ways and has to go and check and see, have I seen this before? Is this something new? And so forth. So there's lots of different pieces just about seeing. And we could do a very similar thing with hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling, thoughts or feelings, all of those kind of things. And it doesn't take very long with any particular object, just as I went through that very quickly, to notice that, yeah, it's that way. So then this meditation is another of the vipassana, or special insight meditations, this time following the Svatantrika approach. So it's a little bit different. It's very close, but very different, a little bit different. It is very similar to the vipassana of other. that we did previously in the Path of Individual Liberation, it begins with refuge and arousing bodhicitta, our nature of mind, followed by the detailed analysis to exhaustion described above, this time using the senses one at a time to establish the lack of inherent existence. You then rest your mind in its own emptiness, so to speak, free of concepts in the vast open space. Then dedicate the merit. Between sessions, observe how, although things appear, they are empty of any self-nature. And it gets pretty obvious pretty fast. So, as with the other practices, this is number 21, the vipassana of Svatantrika. And so, again, we do this twice a day for a week. That should be plenty for most of us. If you need more, you can do more sessions during the day, whatever it takes. And it's always important to set our intention when doing meditation. Why do I do this? I do this for the benefit of all sentient beings. This is a very generic one, but if you have something more specific, that's fine as well. And then we always recite the refuge vow, and so this has a very simple one. You can use it, or again, if you have a preferred option, you can use that as well. So I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, most excellent, in order to enable all sentient beings to attain liberation. So then we get the actual practice, Svatantrika. We settle into the stillness of body, speech, and mind. In the beginning, I usually like to do that, taking a deep breath. And then let it go down slowly and out. Your whole body and mind are relaxed. That's where you want to be to start these. You may have to do it 2 or 3 times. We begin with seeing and then analyze its parts. What can you see? Continue by examining each of the parts to see if they also consist of other parts, and so forth. Follow this by examining the seeing, how it's dependent upon other causes and conditions. What other causes and conditions might be involved here? Do this for each of the parts as well. So you're digging deeper here. Continue until you are confident that the object you are seeing is empty of any inherent existence and or it's dependent upon other causes and conditions. So then repeat the same process for hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and thoughts or feelings about the object. So there's a lot of stuff here, but you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on each of them. Then select another object and repeat the whole process. Do this for 1 or more objects in each session. So 1 is enough. If you really have it, then you don't feel uncomfortable. If you're a little uncomfortable, you don't quite get it, then do another object. Look back at the instructions and then follow back through again and again and again if you need to. And then we conclude by resting naturally in your confidence without thoughts. Just let go and let be. Sit in stillness as long as you can. So that depends on how much time that you have available to you for the practice. And then at the end of each of these practices, we also have a dedication. By the merit of this practice, may I attain liberation for the benefit of all sentient beings. And there are other versions of that you could insert as well. In terms of post-meditation, throughout the day, we continue to examine other objects as you go about your activities of daily life. We're going to encounter lots of objects, and just keep in mind, oh yeah, okay, I get this, I get that. It doesn't take a whole lot, but the more that you do it, the more it becomes a part of the way that you visualize and understand everything. And so then we continue to remain mindful of all that you think, say, and do. And that's one of the core practices of all of Buddhism as well. Now, in the book, it continues on and it gives us some signs of accomplishment In this case, it is in the book. It's called The 10 Bhumis. The 10 Bhumis are traditionally different levels of practice. I guess I should go the other way, from the bottom up, of practices. And in this case, there's 10. There are some versions that have added some on top of that. But those are classical ones. I'm not going to go through all of these, but let me read the list just to give you a sense of what they are. The very joyous Bhumi, the stainless Bhumi, the luminous Bhumi, the radiant Bhumi, the difficult to cultivate Bhumi, the manifest Bhumi, the gone far beyond, or gone afar Bhumi, immovable Bhumi, good intelligence Bhumi, and the cloud doctrine in Bhumi. So those are examples, and this particular example I like. These are written up in various ways, but they make it a lot more clear in terms of the understanding of how that relates to our progress and working through, because it relates it to practices that we're familiar with and so forth. So then there's another section on, signs of luminous emptiness. We talked a little bit about luminous and emptiness and the characteristics of that being interdependent or dependent arising, being partless or permanent or not permanent. So those characteristics, so there's a little bit more information about that. There's a signs of compassion. Compassion is very important, as we saw earlier on. It is a major feature in terms of the practices that are used in meditation for this particular lineage, the view of things in terms of the altruistic view, in terms of the Bodhisattva view, and so forth. And also then some on the signs of great confidence. We have to develop a sense of confidence as we go through this. And so it gives some suggestions on how to go about doing this. So that will conclude this particular branch, the one for the Path of the Bodhisattva or the Path of Altruism. And so look at it, get a good understanding, because that understanding is very important as we move along into the wisdom aspects in these other traditions as well. But next week, we are going to be starting on Tantra. It's the biggest part of the book. There are more things in there than any of the other ones that we're looking at. And so we'll be looking at that in depth. It is somewhat complicated, but it doesn't have to be. So we're going to try and make it fairly simple and easy to understand as a part of that, but it does have a lot of different elements in it, and so we'll be digging into those starting next week. So pray for peace. Please abide softly and deeply in pure awareness with loving kindness, compassion for all beings, always and always.